I'd like to welcome you to another in our series of interviews with attorneys in the local area. This is the University of Pikeville's Kentucky Bar Foundation Speaker Series. I am Nancy Cade. I teach political science at the university. And our guest today is Katherine Burke. Katherine has had a very, oh, that's a terrible way to say it, but a very varied career in the law, from being a judge to working in family practice law and other types of legal entities, if you will, legal fields. And also, I wanted to talk to her a little bit about being a female attorney and bringing that role to Eastern Kentucky. So I'd like to introduce you to Katherine Burke, who is our guest for today. So first of all, Katherine, let me ask you a little bit about background information on you. At what point in your life did you think, yeah, I think I want to be a lawyer?
When I was a senior in college.
You know, you're not the first one of my interviews to have said that. That decision didn't come about until later on. What drove you into the law, do you think?
Well, first of all, everybody tells me it was inevitable because my father and grandfather were both attorneys, but I always said, not so fast. I don't really know if I want to be an attorney or not. I had, when I graduated, I had applied, I'd taken the LSAT, and I was not a great standardized test taker. And so I was still applying to law schools, and I went, in fact, I started at Emory University in a paralegal course, which was actually very helpful in the end because it gave you practical advice as opposed to theoretical advice. And then I got admitted to the University of Louisville, Brandeis School of Law, where my father and my grandfather had both graduated from there. And my friends know that I'm a big U of L Cardinal fan, which has made my life not always comfortable in the mountains. Because I was also looking for something at that time that I could come back home. I had gone to college in Virginia, went to law school in Louisville, and I wanted to come home. And at that time, and that was in the middle to late 70s, women really, their choices in Eastern Kentucky were, you could be a nurse, you could be a secretary, you could be a teacher. I wasn't interested in any of those. So I thought, if I'm a lawyer, I can come back home. And of course, my dad practiced here, and I could work with him, which is what I ended up doing after clerking for the Kentucky Supreme Court for a year after I graduated from law school.
You mentioned something that I think is very interesting, and you're the first person I've interviewed that has talked about this, studying paralegal studies. Normally, I would at this point be asking you about your major in college, because I want students to see that there's a variety of paths. But if you could speak a little bit about what is a paralegal program.
From what I know about it, and I think there's only one or two in Kentucky, is that you become the researcher, the drafter of documents, and the coordination of paperwork for a lawyer. It's more than a secretary, because you have some legal knowledge, but you have expertise in drafting documents under the supervision of a lawyer, as I understand it.
And I think I would see how courses in that type of paralegal studies could be very beneficial to you.
Law school does not teach you how to prepare a pleading, nor does it tell you where you are to file that pleading once you have done it. So at least in paralegal school, if you file this, if you prepare this, this is how you prepare it, and this is where you file it. So that was helpful.
When you were an undergraduate, I'm assuming you went through a fairly traditional liberal arts program. What was your major?
My major was American Studies. And American Studies was, you studied everything American: history, politics, economics, art, music. So it was a broad range in all in liberal arts, and it all with the emphasis on American.
Um, I'm assuming, I could be wrong, but I'm assuming that there were courses that you took that had a certain amount of critical thinking with art, art analysis, literature, those types of things. You do a lot of critical.
They were all basic courses. Of course, I went to an all women's college, and so I got courses in women's history, a specific year-long course in women's history. But there was critical thinking. One of the hardest papers I ever did was in art history, where the paper couldn't be more than 2 pages long, and you had to analyze a quote and take pictures of architecture and describe your theory of it. And that was one of the hardest papers I ever did, because it wasn't a research paper that was 20 pages long.
I'm sure that skill has been very useful to you, that you acquired, of how to write a short paper. People think that writing a short paper is easier, but sometimes it's harder than writing.
Well,
a
and
longer
that kind of
paper.
ties in. My daddy always told me that, cross-examination of witnesses should be short and sweet. And you get to the point and you get out. And so it doesn't have to be long or shouldn't be long and drawn out. The shorter the cross-examination, the more effective it is. So it's kind of an analogy to the same thing.
If you had it all to do all over again, your undergraduate career all over again, and thinking back on your law school experience and thinking on your practice experience, shall we say, and even your judge experience, what courses do you wish you had had? What types of courses do you wish you had taken?
I'd have to think about that. I can't think of any off the top of my head. Because economics you can use in everything in the law. Of course, I've always been interested in politics. I come from a political family, so I was always interested in that. History is important in understanding the development of law and the context in which law was developed. Um, and Of course, I love music too, so that was an outlet, because my dad always said that we need some commonality between professionals in the law and medicine or engineers or whatever. And the music and the art and those kind of things are what gives us the commonality with each other, the connection with each other, that we can be on the same plane. So
That's an interesting idea. One of the interviews that I have done talking with one of the attorneys was talking about interests outside the law and how important that can be to, if you will, your mental health.
absolutely.
Because a legal career can take a lot of your time, and having something like that was important.
And it also it can engulf you if you let it. So you have to have some kind of avocation that you do. I mean, this year, the pandemic and the isolation has taken a huge toll on the legal community. I mean, we've had 4 suicides in like a 2-week, 6-week month period. And Which I never remember that happening since I've been a lawyer, which has been a long time. And So you have to have something to be common with to distract you, because the law is a hard taskmaster if you are good at it, because you are taking on other people's problems, and you are carrying these people on your back if you're doing your job correctly. And if you're not, then maybe you shouldn't be a lawyer, because the obligations that are put on lawyers, you do things whether you get paid or not. You have an ethical responsibility to do that. You have an ethical responsibility to protect your clients from things they may do, things they may say. You have obligations where sometimes you have to tell the court about what your client's doing, and you have this tension between representing your client, but you have an obligation for the law to tell the truth as well. So there's lots of those kind of stressors that go on lawyers that most people don't understand and don't see unless they're personally involved with it.
I think that is such a tragedy what has been happening with so many different professions, but I know the law profession was hit very hard with the suicides, because they've not been able to do their job the way they normally would do it. They've not been able to live the life that is part of who and what they are. And so I think you're very correct, and in the idea of having something outside of the law that you are passionate about, that you care about, and that can bring you a certain amount of joy in all of that. All right. You came out of law school. You came back to Eastern Kentucky. Well, first of all, you had a very interesting stop before that. So
Yeah.
why don't you tell us a little bit about your stop before you came back?
I was a clerk for Justice James B. Stevenson, who was a justice on the Kentucky Supreme Court. Justice Stevenson had been a circuit judge here for many, many years. And he took many people I know as their clerks. The clerkships were for 1 year. And
What does it mean to be a clerk?
A clerk, you do, Judge. My responsibility was to read the briefs, which are the written arguments that were prepared by the attorneys, to do memos to the justice. Each justice had their own clerk.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would give memos or summaries to the judge on the briefs that were that had been presented. Then you would attend oral arguments, which is where the attorneys came in and argued orally, just like it sounds like, before the justices. And when the justices retired to deliberate after the oral arguments, we were privileged to be in on those discussions. We didn't participate. We just got to observe about the conversation about the legal issues that had been brought up by the justices or by the attorneys during the oral arguments. And then sometimes the judges would ask us to write draft opinions if they got assigned to write the opinions in the case, or they would ask us to do research on, give me some cases on this particular issue, and you would do research and give it to them while they were writing their opinions.
Yeah, so often when students hear the word they were a clerk for someone, they might think that they were a secretary or an administrative assistant, but no, that's a real lawyer job. That's
a real lawyer job.
A real lawyer job. And as a matter of fact, it's kind of a really big, important lawyer job, if you will. And it's one of those positions that I think is very interesting because it's almost an academic type of position. It is. You're researching, you're writing, you're analyzing. You're not working for a client. You're working for, if you will, you're working for the law.
The decision maker.
And I think that it is fascinating, and I can see how someone would want to be a clerk for a Supreme Court justice on the state or national level. I can also see why they would want to be a staff attorney for the Supreme Court. I would think that would be absolutely, fascinating for someone who likes to research.
And read.
Yeah, a lot of reading.
Yes.
All right. So you come out of that job and you come back to Kentucky. And I know that from when I first started hearing about Katherine Burke, which I didn't move to Eastern Kentucky until 1986. But when I first started hearing about Katherine Burke, the Katherine Burke that I heard about was very much involved in family law.
Yes.
And that is a field that we haven't had someone in our interview series talking about. So can you tell me a little bit about what your practice as what's called family law would be?
Well, a lot of attorneys, you mention family law and they go screaming in the other direction.
Yes.
They're I think what makes family law different from contract law or personal injury law or um, business law is the emotion that you have to deal with, because you're dealing with people who are not at their best, who are going through life-changing experiences. And while all clients can be difficult, no matter what branch of the law it is, in family law, it's more personal to the client. And so you have to learn, you become a counselor at law as well as an attorney at law. And that doesn't mean that I have had any formal training in counseling, because I have not, because counseling now has a connotation that didn't. But that's why lawyers have been known as counselors of law in the past, because you have to help your client through the maze of this life-changing experience, when oftentimes they're scared financially, they're scared emotionally, they have been scarred emotionally, especially if there's been domestic violence involved. And you have to help them navigate through the legal system with this overlay of emotion on top of it, and try to help them see the light, which is not always possible, and guide them through the process.
When I taught at Ball State University back in the early 80s, I used to take my students down to visit the courts. And I tried to schedule it in Muncie. Friday was divorce court. And I tried to schedule for my students to go both into the criminal courts and then also visit divorce court. And criminal court they found very interesting, but when they came out of divorce court, it was a shell shock appearance. That was something that was not, they had never seen anything. There were emotions, and that is the kind of thing that you're talking about, these life-changing experiences. And working with divorce court has to be, I would think, have to be emotionally challenging for the attorney also.
Yes, it is. But you're helping, I always look at my adult clients, and I've represented children in juvenile court, dependency, abuse, and neglect court as well. It's not only divorce. You're trying to get the adults to look through their own hurt and fear to say, you got to be the adult here for your children, and you've got to get over that. And that's hard, and that doesn't always happen, because people react differently, and you have to figure it out yourself as a lawyer. I remember early on, before domestic violence orders were a thing. That's how old I am. I remember one client in particular, like within the first year of me practicing law, who had been beat up pretty badly. So in those days, you had to file a motion, you had to file an affidavit, you had to go get an emergency order, you had to get an injunction, a restraining order. And by the time you did all that, and you got it, and then when you got ready to proceed with the case 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, the client would say to you, well, we're getting back together. Well, that used to just drive me. I was like, how can you get back together? But it's also, you had to require a kind of empathy, because you've got to realize, especially for the people who didn't have family around here, didn't have any place to go, didn't have a career, didn't know how they were going to afford to feed their children or take care of their children if they didn't have that family support, and if they didn't have that economic support. So it was, I learned over the years that you just can't judge people because you don't know exactly what their situation is. However bad you think the domestic violence is, and how in the heck can they go back if they were that bad. But it's, as we know now, on the cycle, on the wheel of violence, that's the way this animal works. There's remorse, and I'll never do it again, and then it happens again, but there are a lot of factors that go into individuals making those kind of decisions.
And you also mentioned working with children, and I would think that would be, again, a very emotionally taxing thing to have to work with.
It's more taxing working with the parents. When you're appointed to represent the parents, I'd rather represent the kids any day.
I hadn't thought of that, but
because in juvenile court, their attorneys are appointed to represent the parents as well as the children. So most of my friends who do juvenile work, and I don't do juvenile work anymore in my present job, I'm going, I'd rather be a guardian ad litem for the kids. That's an easier job. So,
well, it's a lot easier to sympathize with the kids sometimes.
Yeah, usually.
But I would think that family practice law would be one of those legal fields that you're not going to make a lot of money. You're not going to become, uber wealthy that you might if you were a corporate in-house attorney or something like that, or working for one of the big firms. But I would also think that practicing family law could be very soul satisfying.
Well, to me, it was. I mean, juvenile actions in Kentucky are confidential. So the general public does not know that every Monday you have 20 cases on the docket of dependency, abuse, and neglect. And know that every attorney that's appointed gets paid $500 no matter how long the case goes on, or how many times they have to go to court, or how long they have to stay in court. So you don't, even if you have 5 cases in a day, it depends on where you are in the process, but you only get $500, period. And you still, once you are paid that, you still have an obligation to represent that person, unless the judge lets you out for some reason.
So it's not,
excuse me.
That type of work is not one where you're going to go out and seek clients. The clients are sent to you in a way.
Yes. The judge appoints lawyers to represent those people. Yes.
So in other forms of family law, though, in divorce cases, in adoption cases,
Right.
Those types of things, those would be where the clients would come to you.
Yes. And you can charge hourly. And so obviously you don't get the poor people that way. That's what legal aid's for. But you hope to get the clients who have enough money to pay you and to finance their cases, because there are expert witness fees. If you've got a complicated financial case where you've got a company and you've got to look at finances, and you have to have some forensic accounting, or you want a psychological evaluation done for the custody issues on the parents, can be very expensive.
If you were working in a private boutique practice or even an individual person practice, and you have clients coming in to talk to you about any type of a family law type case, what do you wish clients knew coming in to talk to you?
I wish they knew that it's important to have get all the paperwork they can get. I mean, if a client has fled a home because of domestic violence, then they don't have access to tax returns, financial records, any of those sorts of things. I wish they, had a safety plan that if they know or are contemplating leaving because of domestic violence issues, that they have a go plan, and they prepare for leaving by getting those documents and copies of those documents, unbeknownst to the other side, if they're fearful that there would be a reaction, because a lot of this is oftentimes control. I mean, I've had it on both sides. The woman who says he only gives me $200 a month to run the household on, and I don't know anything else about what's going on, or the man who says, well, I've just given her my paycheck every time, and she was supposed to pay the bills, and I found out they weren't being paid. That's happened. Both of those scenarios, it just happens. So to know that, and to be realistic about what to expect from a divorce. Kentucky's law has changed in the last 2 or 3 years. Now there's a presumption there should be 50-50 split on custody. And many people think, no, I need to be the one where who the children are primarily with. So that's a sea change in the mentality that you come in with and what your expectation is. Now, if there's a reason it shouldn't be 50-50, domestic violence or abuse of some kind, then that can be modified. But you start with the 50-50 custody is the way the law is now.
Now, you went from a private practice to a judgeship. And again, you don't have to be a lawyer to be a judge in all cases, all over.
You do.
No, in the country. I'm
No,
talking
in the
about
country, no, but in
nationally.
Kentucky, yes.
Nationally, different states have different rules and different, shall we say, types of judgeships are all over.
Well, Kentucky did till 1976. So.
Right. And if you want to be, if you enter the legal field with the goal of eventually being a judge, what advice do you have? And
you have to get elected.
Yeah, and that's crucial. Or maybe what advice do you have for my students to say, you know what, maybe that isn't what you want?
Well, Kentucky judges are elected. I was appointed because I was the first family court judge in Pike County and the first woman circuit court judge in Pike County, because family court judges are circuit judges. And so I was a judge for 16 months, helped set up family court because Pike County was one of the pilot programs for family court in the state. And so you have to have an even keel, and you have to be open-minded, and you have to be aware that a lot of people are going to suck up to you because you're judge. And it's not because they like you particularly, but because they want something. I think that goes for a lot of politicians. But and you have to try to be as fair as you can. And we're all human, and not any of us are omnipotent. I've known some judges who think they're omnipotent, but I haven't really run into one yet. So the you have to study the law. You have to you have to know your personnel. You have to know your lawyers. You have to have and everybody's personality, every judge runs their court a little differently because it's based on their personality. So but you've got to deal with your, build up goodwill with your colleagues in the bar.
Did you enjoy it?
Yes, I did.
All right.
I didn't enjoy campaigning, but I enjoyed the job.
Not a lot of people do enjoy campaigning. Campaigning is a
No.
lot harder than people think it is.
It is. That's correct.
So you left being a judge and went back into the practice of law. Where are you now? What do you do now?
I work for Applered Legal Aid, which is the old title is Appalachian Research and Defense Fund, that was started by John Rosenberg in 1971, I guess. We're on our 50th anniversary. And I work for legal aid. And we provide services for a wide range of things. My position is funded by the Victims of Crime Act. So I represent victims of domestic violence in custody cases, divorce cases, and I'm representing the Eric Kahn victims of the Eric Kahn fiasco, because they are victims of crime too. And then that's not necessarily family law, but so I represent poor people now.
I interviewed another one of the attorneys with Applered for this series, Christy Goff, and I'm going to say the same thing to you that I said to her. I am so proud of the work Applered has done to help the victims of Eric C. Kahn, because in fact, many of those people lost their benefits who deserved their benefits.
That's exactly right.
And
it's a gross injustice.
And I think Applered is something that, as an Eastern Kentuckian by choice now, I think that is something we should be so proud that they are trying, that you all are trying to help those people.
And still trying.
Yes. And it's been several years.
Well, it started in May of 2015. So we're coming up on the 6-year anniversary.
And it's been such a horrible miscarriage of justice for the victims. And what people don't realize, and that I think is so important, is how expensive it can be to be a victim of a crime.
Yes.
And that's why having something like the organization that you now work with is so important.
Right.
Because yes, you can get legal aid through pro bono work with attorneys and things like that. But this is an organization that is, pretty much for the greater good.
Yes. So yes, I was on Applered's board. I had 2 stints on the Applered board before I started working for them. So I've been involved with Applered for a long time and always admired at what Applered does, and beyond admiration for John Rosenberg. He's an exceptional individual.
I've heard that from many people, and I think I would have to agree that creating an organization like this to help people is something that is very much worthy of recognition. So, and I think it's also worthy of recognition when successful attorneys go to work for an organization like Applered, because you're not going to become wealthy working
this is my 5-year retirement plan, however. So
but and I look at the people that work for that type of greater good. And that's what I want our students to realize, is that yes, you can become an attorney. Yes, you can go to work in one of the big law firms and become wealthy. Or you can do other work also, and they can also be soul satisfying.
Right.
So that is something you need to kind of
Well,
think
the difference
about?
between Christy and I is, I mean, Christy chose them a long time before I did and has worked for them a long time. I've only worked for them for a little over 4 years. So, but I've been aware of them, but I haven't done the work. So,
I think Christy's been there about 15 years.
yeah,
So
she's been there a long time.
yeah, she came there pretty closely after finishing law school.
Right.
She's one of my alums, so I keep in touch with her. Is there anything else that you would like our students or even the community to know about the legal profession, family law, being a judge, campaigning? Is there anything else that you'd like to share with us before we wrap this up today?
I don't know. I think the law is a noble profession, but it's very hard. It's not like you see on television. Um, there, especially if you are in private practice or you're a sole practitioner or you're in a small firm, there are economic stressors that are out there that don't get talked about a lot. Um, and you have to seek collegiality with your colleagues, especially if you're a sole practitioner or in a small firm. And because it's hard to make it if you're the lone wolf. um, because the law is a intellectual exercise many times, and it's good to bounce ideas off of your colleagues and get their perspectives and that sort of thing. So um, that's that's a lot. You don't see that a lot. I mean, I guess it's the stereotype. Well, you all were yelling at each other in court, and then you go out holding hands. What are you doing? Well, that's the nature of the beast. You can't hold grudges too much, and you might get your feelings hurt a little bit, but then you have to come around and put your big girl pants on and say, well, and you've got to. And I'm kind of, I think my friends would say I'm idealistic and probably still naive at my age, that I still think that seeking justice for people is important. And it's hard because there are a lot of forces out there fighting against justice and equality and the things that I believe in, whether it's women's rights or minority rights or economic rights for people. And I just think that we have an obligation in the legal profession to fight for those things that many in my profession don't. They're in it for just what's in it for them. And as I say, I'm probably naive and still idealistic. And even though you become more cynical after you've practiced law for a while. I still like to believe that I fight for those things in my profession.
And I have to admire that. I have to admire someone who is dedicated to, as they see it, what is right and protecting the rights of others, and not necessarily in the law to become, well, the example I've used in so many cases is Robert Kardashian. He was a very good attorney, a very knowledgeable attorney,
Mhm.
and he became uber wealthy.
Mhm.
But at the same time, that's a rare
Very rare.
occurrence.
Very rare.
And if you're going to struggle, you might as well be struggling for the right reasons.
I
So
try.
I admire that. And I would like to thank you for taking some time out of your day to talk to us. I know my students are going to be very interested in hearing what it's like to be an attorney from your perspective, from a different perspective than someone who is working simply in personal injury law or who is working in corporate law. And I think it was very interesting. Katherine Burke, I'd like to thank you very much
Thank
for
you for the
joining me
invitation.
today. And I'd like to thank the Kentucky Bar Foundation again for the grant that has allowed the University of Pikeville to conduct the interviews and to have our interview series with local and attorneys in variety of areas. Thank you.